Hey everyone, thanks for joining our Reliant Fund Services monthly WebEx. I'm Eric Schultz, managing member at Reliant. This series is all about bringing emerging managers real world conversations you actually need and not the high level generic content you can find anywhere else. Each month, we invite someone who sits inside the day to day reality of building and running a fund, and someone who sees the real pain points, the blind spots, and the questions managers often don't feel comfortable asking out loud. Today we're very excited to be joined by someone with with a genuinely rare vantage point in this space, and someone I personally work closely with across many mutual clients and trust deeply. Bethany Foullois. Uh, Bethany brings over 20 years of private equity operations experience across the full fund life cycle. She's a partner and COO of TAVO, which she co-founded with Katie Bouton, where she works hands-on with emerging managers and independent sponsors to build institutional grade operations. Before launching TAVO, Bethany spent nearly 2 decades as a COO and CCO, overseeing more than 1.5 billion in AUM, covering everything from compliance and HR to investor relations and fund administration. Okay, with that, Bethany, let's jump in. Um, so,
Whenever
uh,
somebody says, "I've done something for 20 years," just makes me
yeah,
feel old.
I know. Well, I've been
Think
doing
about venture capital 10 years before that, I'm like, "That's 30 years of work experience." Like, wow.
I'm doing this for 30 plus years, so I feel even older than you.
Yeah, fair enough.
But you good, luckily enough, you don't look anywhere near the 20 years of your career here.
Yes,
Um,
kind.
so what's the profile of people you see successfully making the leap to launch their first fund? Are they coming from operating companies, larger PE firms, investment
Yeah.
banks? Like, what track record and deal flow do they actually need versus what they think they need?
Well, I think that there's a big proliferation of emerging managers right now that's, I think, driven by, um, a few key things. One is just obviously the market has been booming with opportunities. So you see people that are operating, partners or people that are in operations and businesses and part of their M&A arms and investment banks. They've seen other people be successful doing this and they think that, oh, wow, I can do that too. Or I'd like to be the people that are deriving the value out of that as opposed to the kind of, more baseline value that they're earning today. And then the other side are people that have grown up in private equity firms and cut their teeth the last several years, but then there isn't room to grow, right? So they get to a certain point and they're sort of at an MD level or principal level, and there isn't a path for them for continued success there because it's heavy at the top. So that's driven like a real proliferation of emerging managers. And I think those are in two forms. One is the independent sponsor kind of platform where people are in a more nascent stage, maybe a little more junior, and have um, a good track record, but have done a lot of deals collaboratively with other people and may not have the same credibility of team and track record that some of the more senior peers have. And same goes for, I think, people spinning out of operating businesses in sort of an M&A area or investment banks. But there's a lot of wide open opportunity for people, certainly in the lower middle market, in terms of and that's where I believe I see personally the most growth in emerging managers or some forms of early middle market where they're trying to figure out, how they can take advantage of all the opportunities that they've seen and begin to sort of hang their own shingle, if you will. The challenge with that, though, is that your traditional institutions that back those businesses and your blue chip LPs really only make a few bets a year. They were making more, but I think with the constriction and liquidity in the marketplace, their bar's gotten a lot higher. And now they really feel strongly about seeing track record, team, deal flow, and some reflection that you know how to operate a business as well.
That makes sense. So let's actually talk about what might be the loneliest decision in private equity. You know, should should someone do it this alone or find a partner? How do you actually help first time managers think through the partnership models and what are the economics, the partnership makeups, and what
Yeah.
works and actually what falls apart?
I've seen both. I've seen people that started out as independents and are working and building a team or in the independent sponsor model and going deal by deal and building their team deal by deal, which also then consistently starts to build track record and starts to build team into something that's backable in an 18-month to 2-year time horizon. I've seen teams come together, 3 people, 2 private equity people and an operator. Some sort of private equity operations combination, I think, is a common combo these days, because that operations is positioning them as having, real defined value add to those portfolio companies. And then, I've also seen people that have gone in independently as a single individual raising a fund, and they get pushed very quickly by LPs to say, well, how are you going to do this alone? How can you lead all of this? And sometimes they really want to see you fit, just like they want to see you do a first deal, they want to see you make a few key hires and see how that performs before they're willing to kind of come in early. Um, and the challenge with the economics is to build a firm to start, you have to have a meaningful amount of money sort of set aside because if you are going to go out and put the work into building a team to begin with and actually hiring a few people that are on your bench, right? That's not small dollars when you look at a head count because salary alone, you've got to gross that up by a good, 35, $40,000 to cover annualized benefits and all the other things that go with that. If you want to look like a true business, you're gonna need to have, some home base, which is some typical address in one of the overpriced corridors of, New York or otherwise, right? So people feel like you have an established practice. And you're gonna start to need to spend money on lawyers upfront, right? To develop all your documentation as well as some key partnerships like accounting. And while there are certain investments that you'll make that are going to be contingent upon whether or not you close your fund, there's no doubt that you at least have to invest in space and people and travel, in the early days to see the people that you want to see and to build the team that you need that people will get behind and believe in.
You touched briefly on the cost, and I want to. It's a kind of a question, but then I want to ask, in this current environment, this question. So, what does it actually cost to get Fund One off the ground before you close on the first LP commitment? And
Right.
can you break that down? The real out of pocket expenses that aspiring managers need to have lined up, but with the current condition of the fact that a fund might take you 2 years now, right? Normally,
Right.
it would have been the past, it would have been 6 to 8 months, but this current economic environment, I believe, has extended it further out.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's one of the reasons why you see this sort of advent of the seed platform, right? Where there are people that are now going out and taking management fee stakes and getting the opportunity to be an early LP in your funds, because it is hard for people to spin out and do that. It's the same reason that established funds also do GP lines of credit, right? Because it takes time to realize wealth in private equity because of the life expectancy of carry and carried interest and things like that. So I personally haven't seen anybody really stand up a shop of repute, like, well reputed, for less than say $500,000 because you're at least getting off the ground with a budget of a 500,000 to start to put people to work, right? So, and you may not be paying yourself, but you're probably paying a principal or a VP, you're probably paying an associate, and you are developing relationships with potential service providers. You're going to probably spend 25 to $30,000 in manpo, management company accounting along the way. You are probably going to have to do some travel to start to spin up those deals, and then that travel is only going to get reimbursed back to you if you close those deals. Lawyers and other service providers will do things and give you sort of a cap threshold, but don't typically demand, fee for service until you've closed. But they're also only making those bets on you if they believe that you will, right? So you've got to have some amount of allocated capital to get like those the basic documentation off the ground, which there are certainly law firms out there that'll do that for, $50,000 to give you kind of your first set of documents to look established. But beyond that, then it's about the real fundraising and the work and the dollars that are spent on, reviewing side letters and negotiating agreements with LPs. Which is why it's a significant, amount of money to get up and off the ground.
Yeah, that makes sense. So before we even talk about carry, let's talk about the basics, right? Like, so how should first time managers structure their management fees, their carry, their holdbacks? You know, and can you explain what the difference is between deal by deal carry and level carry, and what makes sense for a debut fund?
Yeah. First, I think most people like to just from a most these days, most things are the traditional like 2% management fee, right? Unless you're in much more, layered fees beyond that, and you on your second fund, third fund, and then sometimes you see negotiated rates. But for the most part, you know, m- I think it's pretty standard to get 2%. If anything, the way that people change that rate is they try to negotiate co-invest and make sure that they're a co-invest partner for you so that over time there's some amount of co-invest that's free to them other than the expenses and dilutes down their management fee. Um, but out of pocket, once you've committed capital, you really want to think about how soon you want to start to call that fee to cover your expenses, right? Because you've obviously made a capital contribution up front to start your business. Let's just say that that's a $500,000. Do you decide to pay yourself back that amount, or do you keep it as the basis in your business? Have you already looked at that as a loss relative to your other economics? You don't want to turn on, if you can help it. There's an argument to be said, don't turn on your management fees right away, because as soon as you start turning on your management fees, you're starting to, you're starting to drag a fee, right? Which is only going to have a negative impact on your IRR. But that also depends on how much more cash you have to invest in your business and whether or not, those economics make sense for you, because you can push that out to maybe, a final close or later, right? Along the lines.
Yeah,
Um, in terms of carry, which is the whole other side of the economics, right? There's the managing the business and having revenue as a day-to-day business that covers your overhead, and then there's the carry portion. Um, I think everybody wants to get an American waterfall or a deal by deal carry if they can. Sometimes that's less achievable for an emerging manager because they want a European waterfall, which means everything's paid back before you get your carry. So, American deal by deal is every dollar you put in, once the dollars come back out, right? They get their cash back, they get their 8% preferred return if that's your standard negotiated rate, and then you start to get 20 cents every dollar. If you're in a European waterfall, you're in the process where you're having to get all the invested capital back, plus the expenses, plus the 8% on top of that before you see dollar. Sometimes that's more comfortable for LPs with emerging managers because they don't want to see you just do one or two good deals. They want the whole portfolio to look good. Um, for an American waterfall, even people who get it deal by deal, sometimes you even see that to improve their performance and their IRR, they're going to give back as much as they possibly can of the invested capital first before they take carry and just take the tax on that. So they're sending more back, they're juicing their performance. It gets them faster to fund too, right?
yeah,
Um, and when you're thinking about the life of your fund and allocated carry, right? And how you incent your team, obviously there's a portion that comes to you as the leader. Um, but you want to be thoughtful about allocating for growth. So you don't want to over allocate early, because if you're building a team that you hope is with you for a long period of time, if you give them a high level of carry early, they're going to only expect it to get higher later. So you have to think about the appropriate bands of that. You have to think about growth in a fund when you're giving away carry at a later stage, because presumably that fund could take 3 to 4 to 5 years to invest, and you'll have later stage deals. You want to think about it on a deal by deal level in terms of you have specific operating partners you're bringing to a particular deal. So there's a handful of different complexities in terms of how you incent your team, how you hold back to incent future team, and how you think about incenting on a one-off basis for individual people and individual deals. And then also you know, you don't want turnover. It's not a great profile, but if you do, how do you hold back carry so that if someone comes in at a later date and takes over responsibilities for a certain deal, that that's available to them if you've already gone through, a couple of years of vesting. So you really have to think conservatively about how you apply that up front because I think sometimes people feel like, well, I don't want to pay a lot up front for you from a headcount standpoint because this is coming out of my pocket now. So let me over incent you with carry. But then you run out of carry because you realize you've given out too much too soon. And it's really hard to retrade on somebody later and keep them motivated. So it's that balance of communication. And I think people also in emerging managers really need to be clear, like leaders need to be clear about what compensation really looks like. Many of my clients, we actually prepare compensation memos, which identify here's your salary, here's your healthcare, here's all the things that goes into, carrying a headcount. And here also is your carry. And on top of that, to the degree that you can leverage something like a fee waiver to make that carry that much more attractive, that's a great incentive too. Um, but also that person by joining a smaller firm is looking for upside, but they have to recognize that certain things may not be as rich in early days because you're in a smaller firm with a single management fee, not a larger firm with layers of management fee and a lot more flexibility to incent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It makes a lot of sense. I've seen horrible situations where you have many defaulting GP members, and now your
Yeah.
carry is a nightmare calculation. So you really
Oh
need
yeah.
a head in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that there are the solutions to that are, to the degree that you can employ a fee waiver, that's a great and attractive model. There are certain people in terms of GP lines of credit. There are plenty of people that are in that business that are very good at that business. But I think that people have to be concerned about the way they think about incenting people upfront and be thoughtful about it because it's you can get yourself between a rock and a hard place quickly when you over allocate and then realize that you've got a lot of runway ahead. And sometimes the team that you hire for the first couple years isn't the right team for you once you get to your ultimate fund size and the capability, and what your demands of your LP base are. That stuff naturally turns over. And you want to make sure you protect yourself for where you could be, 24 months from now.
Nope. It's definitely great advice. Okay, so let's say you're launching Fund One with about, let's just say 25 to $50 million. And what are the
Mhm.
actual roles you need to fill on day one? When you're a GP, lead
Yeah.
investor, and operator all at once, how do you prioritize where you spend your time?
Yeah, I think that first off, running your own. I think one of the things that people overlook when they decide that they want to launch their own fund is that you're actually running a business for the first time, which is a much more holistic investment of time and energy than just being a person who's out there attracting LPs and doing deals, right? You're actually having to be burdened by everything from what kind of insurance do I need for my business? Where's my real estate? How much am I paying my people? What's my healthcare? Oh, and yeah, and tax, and then strategic tax and audit. And they're just, and oh, marketing. And what's my CRM going to be? And what am I going to use? I mean, it's like overwhelming
Oh, wow.
overnight. It's a lot, and it's more than I think people that spin out of larger shops who haven't had to or haven't necessarily had a window into that perceive. And the regulatory environment that we live in, doesn't make that easier, certainly from a compliance standpoint. Um, so first off, I think identifying the buckets that you need to have a competency in like I alluded to, there's the HR bucket, there's sort of your tax and audit and accounting, there's compliance, there's your marketing, there's business development, sketching out that universe. Um, and the key hires are going to be obviously the key people they're going to help you be most attractive to investors and be most attractive to deals, right? Because those are the two key things. So, who are your two key hires in addition to you? Um, Beyond that, in the early stage, what are LPs looking for? LPs are looking for not only your ability to have a team that you've worked with in the past and been successful with, but the ability to attract deals. And then when it comes to operating a business, which is a very important key piece for LPs these days, which is newer in the last 10 years than it was, say, 20 ago, when they're doing their operational due diligence on you, they want to understand that you have your bases covered in operating a business, that you know how to manage a cash flow, that you have the insurance that you need, that you know, then you've covered all the bases with your people, that you have a line of sight and compliance. That can be modeled in a insourced or an outsourced way. You either have to identify within your organization very clear responsibilities that where each person carves out a part of their time to be a dedicated part-time person dedicated to business operations, or you need to find the right outsource provider to be that sort of external quarterback for you. Um, or you can hire someone. The challenges with hiring somebody in an early stage is that most often who you can afford these days in an early stage hire in a finance role, as an example, is going to be junior. You're not going to want to overpay because you're already having to overpay your deal people, because that's where the money's fundamentally made. And that hire is a single point of failure. They probably don't have the full spectrum of experience, both on the management company and business operations side, as well as on the fund side. They may not have seen the cycle of funds from the beginning to the end to understand what the end looks like and what good looks like and how things get from point A to point B. So it's something that you have to be really thoughtful about. And I think the market has matured enough that there are a lot of really good partnership models to get to that first stage where you're not making the hiring commitment the same way that you might have had or thought you had to make it, 5 years ago. And that's due to the proliferation of a lot of subject matter experts in fund administration and compliance and operations and operational due diligence and the like.
Sounds like a lot to consider. Um,
Yes.
so new managers often, I would assume, underestimate the operational burden of actually running a fund. So, what walk us through what the business of private equity actually looks like with regards to HR requirements, the annual audit, tax, investor relations, which is very important, and what actually surprises most people.
I think that the layer of day-to-day administration, I think people think about just hiring and people, but there is a real, I think, annualized cadence to the operations of a business. It's not dissimilar than the way that any private equity person manages a portfolio company, right? The same cadence that they see a business operations in a portfolio company that has a business that they're good at. You're still having, there's an operating person there, right? There's someone running that business. You need the same thing and you need the same cycles. So you have to have the basics around people, right? And processes for managing people and processes for managing their expectations and compensating them appropriately. You need to think about who your key partners are, both for your management company and your funds. Those don't need to be the same people. They can be. There can be great leverage in them being the same people, but it doesn't always have to be because you need to be managing the economics and the bill pay and the payroll and the insurance and the processes for your business. You also need to be thoughtful about all of those that you need on the fund sides, on the deal sides for those. You need management company books and you need fund books, right? Um, you need to lay out budgets for both, ideally, because no matter what, as a manager, you're still paying the bills for your business and your funds, and thinking about the cash flow and the life cycle of that. You're typically running something like the operations of your fund expenses and your business expenses year round. You're doing an audit, once a year. That's going to land and be paid for in Q1. You're going to do taxes. Believe it or not, that's actually almost the entire year because people think about the big tax deadlines, right? But it's actually tax. I think the only time tax people get off is like 4 or 5 weeks between like October and November every year.
Right after
Um,
tax season,
Right. You
October,
have
November, and
compliance, which yeah. You have compliance and compliance deadlines land in March and April, but then there's a constant administering and responsibility as a manager to remind your employees what your compliance rules and regulations are, and then also go through to the degree that you have, over certain thresholds, and maybe the 25 to 50 million is not is applicable, but if you're over the 100, you're an RIA and you have to go through at least a mock audit if you're lucky enough to not have to go through an actual audit. Um, and I think layering out and using frameworks to calendar all these things so that you have a predictive model of how you're going to need to resource your firm along these lines is really important.
Mm. Yeah, we actually had Vanessa last month talk about the whole compliance side, which
Yeah.
was very, very, brought a lot of issues to light that a lot of the fund managers deal with in the beginning of their fund.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
with compliance, there's a lot of things that come up on a regular basis that you kind of have to manage up to your employees and aren't going to be intuitive to them, thinking about reporting political contributions, gifts and entertainment, all those kinds of things that become burdens as a manager that you have to manage up to them to make sure you're compliant as an organization.
yeah. I actually often call the partner that is designated to deal with the accounting side of running the business the unlucky partner because they have to deal with us like fund admins or outsourced controllers, CFO, and that's the last thing they want to do. They want to do deals, right? And
Yeah.
so I always ask in every meeting, who's the unlucky partner that we're going to have to talk to?
Right, right. And I think when you do have like it's important to figure out how to prioritize managing your operations of your business with the things that obviously, really keep the lights on, like the deals and the LPs. Um, but and there are I think it can be very overwhelming, but these are not these are not paths that people haven't gone down, right? They're like it's great referrals, great partners and providers out there that can help demystify how complex this can be and take a lot of burden off of you. It's just a matter of getting introduced to the right people, in many
Exactly
respects.
right. Okay, so let's talk tactical about money. So you're not taking a salary yet. You waive the fees to get to the
Mhm.
first close, but you still have bills to pay. How do first time managers budget for the business and manage personal cash flow in these early years?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to have just like any entrepreneur, you have to think about it in terms of what are your gatekeeping line items for success? How much have you allocated to this runway for yourself to get this firm off the ground? And you have to think about that from a budget standpoint and budget yourself out 8 to 2 years and look at what your milestones are going to be along the way in terms of how you're going to access liquidity if you haven't made the commitments, right? So, haven't gained the commitments. And I think you've got to be really honest with yourself about budgeting those kinds of things, and laying out what you think it's going to cost you. The key items upfront are going to be, in terms of the fundraising, like we touched on before, are going to be the basics of your people, but not just the salaries, all the little other HR bits that go into that, right? You're going to need space. You're probably going to need accounting, assuming you're not doing your own accounting on QuickBooks, which I don't recommend to anybody. You're going to need a certain allocated amount of cash for fundraising and, for deal flow. You're going to need IT, right? You're going to need some basic IT investments. You're going to need probably someone to do your tax work for your own business, right? So layering all that out, and if I didn't mention rent again, rent,
You did.
okay?
Yes.
You have to lay
Cover
all that
everything.
out and look out. Yeah, yeah. It feels that way sometimes, especially if
Yeah.
you're in New York. But lay that out for yourself in a 2-year time horizon and
Yep.
think about and have that cash because these days it can take, 2 years easily to raise a fund, if not more. And unless you're really, really lucky. And there have been some really great lucky people out there, but those are fewer stars in the sky, right? So you have to give yourself the runway, give yourself a commitment, and then understand what your trade-offs are to the degree that and when you're going to need to make them. And those are going to be things like, are you talking to people about potentially seeding? Like, is that something you've got going on in the background? Have you identified other partners you might bring in that would love to do this too, but you weren't ready to bring one on yet? And then how do you trade that off? So just like you would looking ahead at any portfolio company that you had, right? You'd be looking at how much cash do I have to run it this way? And what are my break points on, when I'm going to need to infuse more capital to do a follow-on investment. It's the same thing. You're just investing
Yeah.
in yourself at this point. You're not investing in something else. So you should treat it with the same demands and operational integrity of like, I have 60-day goals, I have 90-day goals, and hold yourself equally accountable.
It's a lot easier to have someone else do it when it applies to their business, but for your own, it's always a little more difficult. But then
True,
I
especially because you got hope, right?
exactly right.
Hope and belief.
You're al- you're always more positive than than maybe you should be very negative and always take a very conservative approach, but that's not always the case.
Right. Right.
Um, so something that I'm actually familiar with, and I definitely want to hear your opinions about. So outsource first, in build in house question comes up a lot. For a
Mhm.
fund one manager, what should you absolutely outsource, and what gives you credibility with the LPs, and where does it make sense to save money and do it yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think the two lowest hanging fruit things for outsourcing become using a PEO for a professional employment organization for all the HR. There's some great ones out there. You can go as simple as the Gustos, or you can do the Insperities and Trinets of the world. There's pluses and minuses of all of them. But there's a reason that that's become a commodity. And I think outsourcing your fund administration is another. There's the one thing, and I always used a fund administrator. I
Yeah,
think increasingly LPs are very pro outsourcing, both, because
yeah,
it's not where they want you spending your time either. And also fund administrators have made that investment in the sophistication of systems. But the key reasons why are, first off, it costs you less money to do both, because when you're outsourcing your HR, they're giving the best pricing possible on all the things because they're group pricing it. And when you're outsourcing your finance, you're getting what's essentially a three-person team with a lot of redundancy and a lot of experience, that you couldn't buy for with a 200 to $250,000 a year salary and a 3 to 5% carry spread for a first-time CFO. You're probably getting someone who was a VP of finance or like
yeah.
in the shadows of the CFO at a firm, and they've probably only seen part of the work. And instead, you're going over to an admin that's going to have a team that's going to cover your management company, this 2 to 3 person, a team, this 3 to 4 people that are running your fund, and you have no single point of failure. So if you've done your work and selected the right partner, you're also going to have very little turnover, which is a much better place to be than having one person that you're banking everything on, who probably actually doesn't have the experience to do all that and hasn't seen all the idiosyncrasies of your fund. Because with the right partners, you're more protected and safe because they know more than you do about that, especially from an economic standpoint. And they're going to be on your side, and they're going to be advocating for you and telling you what you need to be concerned about and ways you can be more successful when they educate you on how they've seen other funds be successful, whether it's strategies for tax, whether it's strategies for recycling capital. You can't say enough about the reps that those teams have, that can make you better at your business.
I mean, I think I need to bring you into every pitch we go into where we're
Well,
pitching
it served
ourselves.
me really well. Yeah, it served me
You
really
you
well.
basically
And
say everything
yes.
we say, but they don't always believe us, right? It's great to hear it from,
Mhm.
someone that actually is on the operational side.
Yeah, and I think there's also really great partner providers that you can find out there that can extend. You don't need to do marketing. They can be the people who you outsource that to, there's lots of little providers. It doesn't make sense to have if you can knit something together, it doesn't make sense in the early days to start to build up true subject matter experts in your organization, until you reach a higher scale, and then at that point, like in early days, I would argue you do not need to hire a CFO. Like you just don't. You should have somebody who's dedicated to operations as a whole. And they're the people who are calendaring that, knitting all that together for you and managing up to you. But it's a risky hire to make early on when you don't know what the character of your LP base is and the amount of money you're going to have. And it's not necessarily the highest and best use of your salary dollars, your benefit dollars, and your carried interest. When you can get all that in an outsourced provider without any of those complexities, especially managing people. Managing people is is no small task.
Uh, and one other thing, if you hire a CFO, you then need to hire a controller and a book and a junior accountant. It's not just
Right,
one.
because you don't want it
One
to be all one person. Yeah.
right. You don't want your
Right.
CFO paying your bills, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
the best use of their time, and right. So, like you were saying, you get the leverage of 2 to 3 or 4 people on a team that can, you know, provide a separation of duties and
Yeah,
also,
see?
let the CFO do the most uh, intricate part of the accounting side of the business.
Exactly. Strategic. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly right. Um, so, first time managers often don't realize that they're being evaluated, on their operations and not just deal selections, right? What does operational due diligence look like in Fund One, and what are actually institutional LPs? What do they need to see before they actually write a check?
Yeah, I think they've, in addition to just team track record deal flow, they definitely grade. There's a whole reason why there's an industry now around operational due diligence. 20 years ago, Yale had like one guy. I remember him very well. He was dedicated to all operational due diligence for Yale. Yeah, I think Stanford had one of the next. Like they, but now you have firms that LPs hire to come in and do operational due diligence if they don't have the experience themselves or the competency internally. And the reason they do that is because they invested in emerging managers and those managers ran their businesses into the ground because they either didn't know how to manage them, didn't know how to find the right partners and providers. They had too much turnover to maintain their portfolios. So it's really the extra that extra piece that they look for. And and that is exhausting and pretty comprehensive. And why I say that is you're going to get everybody creates a DDQ, right? When they're raising a fund
Yep.
that says I do all these things, but they're going to come in and actually test it. And they're going to sit down, whether they hire a firm or they come in, to your office physically to make sure you have the, office that you said you had and the people that you said you had. And they're going to go through every competency that you have. They're going to talk about your IT and whether or not you do penetration testing. They're going to come in and they're going to see whether or not you do phishing testing. They're going to see, do you actually have the compliance system that you want? They're going to ask all the questions. Do you have dual authorization and wires if you're the right size? Who do you use to bank with? It's not, I don't say it to scare people. It's actually the reality. And it's not, I would actually say operational due diligence is a is a large gatekeeping item for LPs these days, because if they can't check the box that they think you can run your business itself, then they can't check the box to back you. So, um, having something that you lay out that covers all of the major competencies from technology to compliance to committees and laid out for them, um, as you build your business, if you take your sort of like master checklist of operations and you start to kind of convert that into a presentation, every time you make decisions and memorialize that, you're going to be in a much better position to sit down and go through operational due diligence with people and say, "Oh no, I thought this through." Having all the answers isn't as important as I know that it's an issue. I'm going to address it this way. Because when you're young, they don't expect you necessarily to be doing all the things right away, but they want to know that it's on your that it's something you know about and that you're aware of and you're managing to it at some point in time. Like they're not going to worry. They want to know you're with a blue chip IT provider. You're with an ECI or an RSM or whoever. They want to know you're not with like Joe's shop, and they want to know that you're not just cyber curious, but that you have at some point in time the intention of having, the right kind of testing that's done externally. Similar, they want to make sure that even if you don't have your insurance yet, you know what GPL insurance and bond you're going to get from a cybercrime standpoint, and that you're going to have, fiduciary accountability, even if you haven't contracted it yet. They just want to know.
Yep.
I had this great when I was college, I I studied computer science in college, and every major at Amherst College had what they called a comprehensive exam at the end. Um, for art, it could be write about these 5 pictures. For computer science, it was like 12 questions, each had 3 parts, and it was exhaustive. But one of the things that they told you was, you'll never get it wrong. At least if you tell us the best of what you know, even if you don't answer the question. I always think about that with respect to operation of due diligence,
Yeah.
which is just tell us what you know so that we know enough to know because we want to pass you.
Right.
Because if we've gotten to that point, we actually want to say yes to you. So just don't give me a reason to fail you.
Yeah. That
And
makes
at
sense.
least having answers that you're aware is way better than, evading
Clueless.
the issue,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
Points,
We're
credit, it's like points for credit. Yeah. So
exactly. We're brought in a lot more these days. We probably have done at least 8 or 9 DDQs with, for our funds, with
yeah,
raising new funds. So, they're really the DDQs are really getting uh much more dynamic than they used to be in the past.
yeah,
Um, so, with what you've said, what are there any operational best practices that give emerging managers credibility? And what
yeah.
separates someone who looks like they can scale versus someone who looks like they're figuring it out as they go?
Sure. I think that upfront, that budget planning, when I've been in rooms where LPs have said, "Can you share your headcount plan? Can you share your budget with us? Can you share what that looks like?" Because they actually wanna see it. They wanna know and you don't have to give it to them. They wanna see it up on the screen, so, you can go and take a look and share that with them. They're not necessarily gonna poke holes in it, but they wanna know that you've done the thought and that thought exists. Having, sort of a master calendar of what the year looks like and how you manage your organization and how you're thinking about milestones, I think is super valuable, in terms of like knowing when the milestones will be, knowing when you're thinking about certain things that can show capital calls, distributions, tax dates, compliance dates, but that you have foresight, like looking ahead to what the roadmap for your business is the next 12 or 18 months out. And then I think having what's essentially a business process document, which could be in the form of a narrative or it can be in the form of a PowerPoint presentation, which is not the Q&A that's in a DDQ, but actually kind of DDQs and compliance manuals are usually like very burdensome and cumbersome
Mhm.
operating documents. What's the thing that actually is tailored to you? It's like if so and so was hit by a bus in your organization, how would they know what decisions had been made? And
It's like the
those are the
bespoke
things where
document, right?
yeah, it's like if you're walking through, if someone comes in and says operation of due diligence, you're going tab by tab and saying, here's how my management company works. How my funds work. Here's the choices I've made for tax. Here's who does my fund. Here's who's done my Nanco. That you've made those decisions. And then if you don't have them, who the 3 or 4 people are that you're looking at, right? And I think keeping that in some master document as you grow puts you in a really prepared setting to both memorialize that content, but also share it with others. And I think when LPs can see the that you've put in the thought and you have the roadmap, that you understand what your time horizon looks like. So from a budget and a calendar standpoint, when they can see a document where they can go through and see that you've made the major business operating decisions or know that they exist or are thinking and talking to the right people, that's good enough.
Right. They want to know that you can run a business, especially your own, right?
Yeah.
And so that makes a lot of sense. So it's pretty much the last question, and it's a two-part question. So, you've worked with many managers at the exact inflection point from fund zero to fund one. And
Mhm.
what are the three most important things that determine whether someone will be able to successfully launch and position themselves from fund one to fund two? Number one. And then what's your framework for thinking about priorities and accountability when you're building it from scratch?
I think the key thing up front is prioritization. So it's very when you are running your own business, I think in any capacity, the number one issue for anyone is priorities because it is very easy to get distracted by what your core goals are. So if any manager who's raising a fund has to think about what their core goals are and what their priorities are and manage yourself on that and on a day-to-day basis. What do I mean by that? I mean that your calendars, everybody's going to want to meet with you. Everybody's going to want to sell to you. You know, everybody's going to want to be your new best friend. Like, don't take all the meetings. Like, take the ones that matter, prioritize your time around what's going to move the inflection point, right? And the inflection points are going to be deal flow, team, track record's already done, right?
Yeah.
LPs, business operations, right? Those key goals. But if you're not always queuing to those priorities, you're going to first off go to the things that you enjoy the most, which is probably doing the deals and stuff like that. And you're going to leave the other stuff behind and it's going to catch up, right? So managing yourself to what the priorities are that are going to move that needle forward to you over and over and over again on a daily basis. Any executive coach is going to tell you the same thing, but it's like, it's hard to do, like we all know to eat, right, and exercise, right? But it's hard to do, right? So I would
It
say
is.
priorities one. Accountability is key. So within your organization, you need to make sure that people know what their jobs are. Because if you haven't set up very clearly for people and you're now managing a different ecosystem for the first time, it used to be like you'd manage your deal team or whatever. Now you got a whole organization of people you're hiring around you. Like, it can be one
Yep.
people, two people. As soon as you have more than one, you have someone not knowing what they're doing. And that's probably the other person, right? You need to have very clear accountability and expectations for people. So that can be in job descriptions, sure. That can be in lists of to-dos, right? So the communications about priorities and accountability is so important. Make sure you know what your people are spending their time on. Because if you're not tracking, if you're not having that conversation, they're
Yep.
probably focused on what they'd rather do the most too, right? And if you want it to all hang together, you need to make sure everybody's prioritized, everyone's aligned, and everyone has the right accountability. Example, if you're tasking people in your organization to cover certain things like, oh, you're on CRM, you're on marketing, you're on this, or whatever it is you're starting out, you got to make sure they're really doing the work, or you're going to get to the
Mm.
next milestone and they're going to be scrambling at the last minute. And because it wasn't really what they wanted to do, and your choices aren't going to be great choices because they didn't do the work as effectively as they should have. They should be
Yeah.
applying the same level of due diligence to that process as they are to any other deal that you might be doing, right? The same effective effort. Um, and then I would say that, this doesn't have to be a lonely place, to your point before. I think there's a lot of people that are out there looking that have the experience, whether it's peers or experts. Like, there are ways out there to tap the right kind of frameworks and tools and resources to demystify this, right? It doesn't have to be hard. I would say what was harder 10 years ago doesn't need to be hard now. The whole market's been made off helping people be successful doing this, right? So find those people, find those people that are excited to see you be successful and that you can trust and they are going to rally around you and provide you with the frameworks that you need to be successful and to simplify it so you can do the stuff that you enjoy the most because you don't have to do what's considered the hard things to you if you can find the right team. And that team can be when you hire, and that team can be virtual as well.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
would say priorities, accountability, and the right sort of like frameworks and resources.
yeah. I mean, I think the hardest part is finding the people like yourself, right? Like finding the right outsourced COO firm because there's everyone says the same thing, and it's like until you've actually worked with someone like yourself and actually deliver on what you promise. A lot of people are skeptical that that everyone's saying all the proper buzzwords. So
Right.
it's great that I was able to introduce you to hopefully a big group of people that really can and learn from your experience and I think
I liken it to I think whether it's in your role or my role,
yeah.
sometimes it's hard to it's kind of like that personal coaching kind of environment, right? Where
Yeah.
there are people that have the expertise, right? So, but you're making it harder for yourself when you're trying to do it yourself. So if you can find the right guidance and coach and expert to clear out all those cobwebs for you and demystify the complexity of it all, it just doesn't have to be hard, and it doesn't have to be aggravating either.
I kind of think of us as like the quarterback that really kind of manages the whole team for them, right? And so that they can do
Yeah,
the job that they want to do, and we are managing all other aspects and communicating to the coach or general partner in this example.
exactly.
And so, I just wanted to say thank you. This was
Oh, my
fantastic.
pleasure.
I think a lot of people are now more confident on how to think through a fund operations. Well, at least far more confident than they were about 40, maybe 52 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And thank you so much
So
to
you
me.
guys don't.
Since Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for making something that often feels very overwhelming actually feel practical and manageable.
No, my pleasure. And I know I will see you soon. So thank you for
Yes, you
including
will.
me. I appreciate it. All right.
You
Take
got
good
it.
care.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.